It was a quiet little town where the evenings were filled with the sound of birds returning to their nests and the faint hum of distant traffic. Among the narrow streets lined with small houses and flickering lamps lived a young girl named Lena. She was an ordinary girl to anyone who saw her passing by. Shy, modest, with hair that often fell into her eyes and hands that were always restless, as if trying to play invisible keys on an invisible piano. What most people didn't know was that music was the one thing that filled her world with color. Lena had never owned a piano. Her family could barely afford the rent, let alone an instrument. Her father worked long hours fixing bicycles, and her mother stitched clothes for the neighbors. They were kind people, simple and honest, but their days revolved around work, not art. Still, whenever Lena passed by the community hall in the middle of town, she stopped near the window and listened. The hall had an old upright piano slightly out of tune, but to her ears it sounded magical. She would stand there until someone noticed and told her to move along. Sometimes, when no one was around, she would sneak inside quietly. The hall smelled of dust, old wood, and faint perfume left from past performances. The piano stood in the corner like a sleeping giant. She never dared to touch it for long. Just a few soft notes before fear made her step back. She had no teacher, no books, and no lessons, yet she tried to remember the melodies she heard others play. She would hum them at home, tapping her fingers on the kitchen table as her mother laughed and said, "If only that table could make music." It wasn't easy. There were days she wanted to give up. Watching other children take real lessons while she could only dream hurt deeply. But every evening she found herself back at that hall, waiting for the faint sound of keys being pressed by someone who actually knew what they were doing. One night, after everyone had gone, she gathered enough courage to step inside again. She sat at the piano, her heart pounding. She pressed one key, just one, and it echoed softly in the empty room. That was when she heard a voice behind her. "You really like that piano, don't you?" Startled, she turned around. It was the janitor, an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. She thought he would scold her, tell her to leave. But instead he walked closer and smiled. "You come here often," he said. "You listen more carefully than anyone I've ever seen." Lena lowered her head, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I just wanted to hear it up close. I won't touch it again." But the man chuckled. "Don't say that. A piano isn't meant to be feared. It's meant to be played." He looked at her hands. "If you love it that much, learn with your heart. Music doesn't always come from lessons, and it comes from listening." Those words stayed with her. From that night on, she began sneaking into the hall even more often, but now with his quiet permission. Sometimes he would sweep the floor while she practiced softly, showing her how to read a few simple notes he remembered from his younger days. He wasn't a musician, but he knew the basics. "Start small," he told her. "Every great song begins with one note." The first few months were rough. She made mistakes constantly, her fingers stumbling across the keys, but she didn't give up. She learned by watching how others played during rehearsals. She noticed how their fingers curved, how they breathed in rhythm with the music, how they closed their eyes during emotional parts. Slowly, she began to imitate them. Her first real melody came almost by accident. One evening after everyone had left, she sat at the piano and started pressing random keys. The janitor was sweeping in the back, humming softly. Without thinking, she followed his hum, matching it with the piano. The simple tune filled the quiet hall, and for the first time, she felt something awaken inside her. A connection she couldn't explain. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. When she finished, the janitor clapped softly and said, "That's it, child. That's music." Years went by and Lena grew. Her hands became more confident, her sense of sound sharper. But life remained the same. Work, chores, and music, and stolen hours. Her parents supported her quietly. Her mother once told her, "Dreams are beautiful, but they don't feed you." Lena understood, yet every time she played, she forgot hunger, fatigue, and worry. One chilly evening, she overheard something that made her heart skip. The town was hosting its annual music festival. A small event, but it was everything for local musicians. Posters hung all over the square, announcing an open audition for young performers. The winner would get a chance to perform on the festival's main night in front of the town's most respected musicians. Lena read that poster over and over. She wanted to try, but she also knew how foolish that sounded. Everyone who auditioned had teachers, training, and experience. What did she have? A few hours at an old piano and memories of melodies played by others. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about it. That night she mentioned it to the janitor. He smiled knowingly, as if he had been waiting for her to bring it up. "You should go," he said. "Don't worry about what others have. They might play with skill, but you play with heart. That's something you can't teach." Lena shook her head. "They'll laugh at me. They'll know I'm not trained." He leaned on his broom and said softly, "Maybe. But sometimes the world needs a reminder that music isn't about perfection. It's about truth. When you play, don't think of impressing them. Think of telling your story." The night before the audition, Lena barely slept. She stayed awake staring at the ceiling, imagining herself on stage. She could already hear the whispers of the crowd, feel the heavy silence before the first note. Her heart raced. She thought about giving up, pretending she was sick, but something inside her refused. She got up quietly, went to the hall, and played for hours under the dim lights. The janitor sat in the back, listening without saying a word. As dawn broke, she finished her practice and stood up. "Do you think they'll let me play?" she asked. He nodded. "They will. And when they do, remember what I told you. Play what you feel, not what you think they want to hear." The next morning, the community hall was packed with contestants. Some wore formal dresses, some had polished instruments, and others carried sheet music filled with complex notes. Lena stood among them, wearing a plain dress her mother had ironed that morning. Her hair was neatly tied back and her shoes were slightly worn out. She held no music sheets, just her trembling hands. While waiting, she heard the others talking about music schools, teachers, and upcoming performances. She stayed quiet, clutching the small charm bracelet her mother had given her. When her name was finally called, she felt her knees go weak. As she walked to the stage, she could feel dozens of eyes on her. The piano looked larger than ever. She took a deep breath and bowed slightly to the judges. One of them, a man with glasses, smiled kindly and said, "Just play a simple tune, dear." "Anything you like," she nodded. The word simple echoed in her mind. She sat down, placed her hands gently on the keys, and for a moment the world disappeared. Her fingers hesitated. She could hear her heart beating faster than any rhythm she'd practiced. But then she remembered the janitor's voice, the nights she played in silence, the feeling of peace the music always gave her. She closed her eyes and pressed the first key. The sound rang out softly, fragile, uncertain, but pure. She began to play the same melody she had discovered years ago, the one born from her heart and her memories. With every note, her nerves began to fade. Her movements became smoother, her emotions guiding her more than thought. She wasn't following rules anymore. She was speaking in the only language she truly understood, music. For those watching, it was a simple tune. But to her, it was a lifetime of dreams, fears, and hopes all woven together. When the final note faded, Lena stayed still for a second, afraid to look up. The silence in the hall was heavy but not cold. Something about that moment told her that maybe, just maybe, she had touched someone's heart. That performance would change everything, but she didn't know it yet. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, she had been brave enough to let the world hear her soul, and that was only the beginning. The day of the audition came like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. The morning sun slipped through the thin curtains of her small room, painting golden lines on the wooden floor. Lena sat quietly by the edge of her bed, still wearing her simple dress from the night before. Her heart felt heavy with both fear and hope. She had never performed in front of people before. Not like this. Every sound, every heartbeat felt louder than usual. Her mother came in holding a cup of tea. "Drink something," she said softly. "You'll feel better." Lena smiled weakly and took the cup. The warm steam brushed her face, calming her just a little. Her mother adjusted the little ribbon in her hair and said, "No matter what happens today, remember we're proud of you." Her father, who rarely said much, added quietly from the doorway, "Do your best. That's all that matters." Those words stayed with her. She finished her tea, put on her shoes, and stepped outside. The air was crisp and she could hear birds singing in the distance. It was a beautiful day, too beautiful to waste on fear. As she walked toward the town hall, she tried to steady her breathing. Her hands were cold, but her heart was warm with determination. The community hall looked different that day. There were banners and flowers at the entrance, people walking in and out, and a sense of excitement in the air. She saw children carrying violin cases, Teenagers adjusting their sheet music and parents whispering encouragement. Everyone seemed to belong there except her. She took a seat in the back row and clutched her hands tightly in her lap. Her mind was full of doubt. Maybe she wasn't ready. Maybe the janitor had been wrong to encourage her. Maybe the others would laugh when they realized she couldn't even read music properly. Then, as if he had read her thoughts, she saw the old janitor walk in. He wore his usual faded jacket and held his broom in one hand, pretending to tidy up near the stage. When he spotted her, he gave a small nod, a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone. That small gesture gave her courage. The auditions began. One after another, the performers went up to the stage. Some played lively tunes that made the audience tap their feet. Others performed slow, graceful pieces that filled the room with emotion. The judges clapped politely each time, taking notes on their papers. Lena listened carefully, admiring the talent around her. Every performer looked confident and professional. Their fingers danced across the keys like magic. She admired them, but also felt smaller with each passing minute. When the announcer finally called her name, she froze for a moment. The room seemed to grow silent. Her heart began to race. She stood up slowly, trying not to let her shaking legs show. The janitor gave her a little thumbs up from behind a curtain, and that was enough to push her forward. The stage lights were brighter than she had imagined. They made her squint as she walked toward the grand piano at the center. It gleamed under the light, elegant, intimidating, perfect. She took a deep breath and bowed slightly to the judges. One of them, an older man with a kind face, smiled at her. "Take your time," he said. "Just play a simple tune, anything you feel comfortable with." A simple tune, that was what they asked for. It sounded easy, but to Lena, those words meant something deeper. She didn't want to just play something memorized. She wanted to play something that told her story. She sat down, adjusted the stool, and placed her hands gently on the keys. The first note came out softly, almost like a whisper. Then another, and another. Slowly, the melody began to form, the same one she had played countless times in the quiet hall when no one was watching. At first, her fingers trembled. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears. But then, as she let herself sink into the rhythm, everything else faded away. The audience, the judges, the lights. It was just her and the piano. She could feel every note moving through her, as if the piano was speaking for her. Her melody wasn't perfect. A few notes slipped, and her timing wavered once or twice. But there was something raw and honest in her playing, something that came from deep inside. It wasn't about showing off skill. It was about sharing a feeling. The audience, which had been whispering moments earlier, grew completely silent. The judges leaned forward. Even the janitor, standing quietly at the side of the stage, looked as though he was holding his breath. The simple tune grew more emotional as she played. It wasn't planned that way, but her hands moved with her heart. Memories of lonely evenings in the hall, the sound of the janitor's broom, her parents' tired faces, and her dream of being heard, they all flowed into her music. When she reached the final note, it lingered in the air, soft and trembling. Then silence. Lena kept her eyes closed for a moment, afraid to look up. She didn't know if she had done well or if she had just made a fool of herself. But then something unexpected happened. A single clap broke the silence, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire room was filled with applause. It wasn't the polite kind of clapping people give out of courtesy. It was loud, full, and genuine. People stood to their feet, cheering for her. Some even whistled. Lena opened her eyes, stunned. She could hardly believe it. The judges were smiling, and one of them was even wiping his eyes. The kind man who had spoken to her earlier said softly, "Beautiful. Truly beautiful." She stood up slowly, bowed again, and walked off the stage with trembling hands. As soon as she stepped behind the curtain, the janitor was there waiting for her. His eyes shone with pride. "I told you," he said quietly. "Play what you feel." Lena laughed, tears running down her cheeks. "I was so scared," she whispered. "And yet," he said with a smile, "you made the whole room listen." They both stood there for a while, just listening to the echo of the applause fading away. It was a sound she would never forget. After the auditions ended, the judges called all participants back to the hall. Lena stood among the others, still unsure if she had imagined the applause. The head judge, a tall woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward and said, "Each of you played wonderfully today. But there was one performance that moved everyone, not because of technique, but because it came from pure emotion. Lena's heart stopped for a moment. The judge continued. The performer who played that simple, heartfelt tune reminded us why music exists, to touch the soul. Then she called Lena's name. For a moment, Lena didn't move. She thought she had misheard. The janitor gave her a gentle push, whispering, "Go on, child." As she stepped forward, the audience began to clap again. The judges handed her a certificate and told her that she would perform on the festival's main stage that weekend. She could barely speak. She just kept bowing, thanking them again and again. That evening, when she returned home, her parents were waiting at the door. They already knew. Someone from the town had run ahead to tell them. Her mother hugged her so tightly that she could hardly breathe, and her father, who almost never showed emotion, had tears in his eyes. "We're so proud of you," he said softly. "You did what most people only dream of." Lena smiled, still dazed. "I just played what I felt." Her mother laughed through her tears. "Then keep feeling, my dear. That's your gift." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed replaying the moment over and over. The silence before the final note, the faces in the crowd, the sound of hands clapping, the warmth that filled her chest. It didn't feel real. She wasn't trained. She wasn't famous. She didn't even have her own piano. But somehow she had managed to move an entire room of people. The next few days were a blur. People in town recognized her on the streets. Shopkeepers congratulated her. Children pointed and whispered, "That's the girl who played at the hall." Even her teachers from school came to see her, surprised and proud. She went back to the community hall to practice for the upcoming performance. The janitor was there, of course, sweeping as usual. "Looks like the world finally heard your music," he said. Lena smiled and sat at the piano. "Thanks to you," she said. He shook his head. "No, child. Thanks to your heart." As she played that evening, something inside her had changed. Her hands were still the same, but her confidence had grown. The notes sounded clearer, more alive. She wasn't playing for practice anymore. She was playing for joy. Every night before the big day, she stayed longer at the hall. The janitor sometimes brought her a sandwich, reminding her not to forget to eat. They didn't talk much. The music spoke for them. When the day of the festival finally came, the hall was filled with people. More than she had ever seen in one place. The same piano waited for her on the stage, shining under the lights. As she stood backstage, the janitor patted her shoulder. "Remember," he said, "no matter how big the stage, it's still the same piano. And you're still the same girl who played because she loved it." She nodded, her eyes full of gratitude. As the curtains lifted and she walked onto the stage, she could hear the audience murmuring softly. She sat down, took a deep breath, and smiled. For the first time, she didn't feel nervous. She felt ready, and when she began to play, the music carried her, not just through the notes, but through every moment that had brought her there. The janitor was right. It wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. And her truth was more beautiful than she had ever imagined. That night, when the applause filled the hall once again, it wasn't just the sound of success, it was the sound of a dream beginning to come true. The evening of the town's main festival was brighter than any other night of the year. Lanterns hung across the streets, music floated through the air, and laughter echoed from every corner. For most people, it was a night of celebration and joy. But for Lena, it was the night that could change everything. She had been practicing for days, her fingers growing sore from endless hours on the piano. Every evening, she stayed in the community hall until the lights dimmed, and the janitor had to remind her to go home. "You'll do just fine," he always said, smiling as he swept the floors. But deep down, Lena couldn't shake the nervousness. This wasn't just another performance, it was the performance, the one that everyone in town would remember. By sunset, the hall was packed. Families, students, teachers, and musicians filled every seat. The air buzzed with excitement. People whispered about the young girl who had played such a moving tune at the auditions. Some came out of curiosity, others out of admiration. They all wanted to see if the quiet girl with no formal training could do it again. Backstage, Lena sat on a small wooden stool, clutching her hands together. Her palms were sweaty and her heart raced. She could hear the muffled applause from the audience as the performer before her finished their act. A stage assistant poked his head in and said, "You're next." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked down at her dress. the same simple one she had worn at the auditions. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and neat. Her mother had pressed it carefully that morning. Around her wrist was the little charm bracelet that jingled softly every time she moved. She touched it for luck and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her thoughts. Then she heard a familiar voice. "You'll be fine," said the janitor, standing by the door. He had come early to watch her again, his old jacket looking even more worn under the backstage lights. "Remember what I told you. Play what you feel, not what they expect." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. When her name was announced, the crowd fell silent. Lena stepped out from behind the curtain, the stage lights blinding her for a moment. The grand piano sat at the center, shining under the glow. She took a deep breath, walked slowly toward it, and sat down. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. For a brief moment she thought about the girl she used to be, the one who stood outside the hall's window just to listen. The one who played in secret, afraid of being heard. And now here she was, sitting in front of hundreds of people, ready to play her heart out. The room was so quiet that she could hear the faint hum of the lights above her. Then she pressed the first key. A soft, gentle sound filled the hall. The melody began slowly, just like before, simple, delicate, and pure. But as she continued, her fingers found new courage. The music grew stronger, her notes weaving through the air like threads of light. It was as if every lesson, every mistake, every moment of doubt had turned into something beautiful. The audience leaned forward, drawn in by the sincerity of her playing. The judges sat motionless, their eyes fixed on her hands. The janitor, watching from the side, smiled quietly to himself. Lena played not just for them, but for herself, for the nights she had practiced alone, for her parents who had believed in her, and for the dream that had kept her alive when everything else felt too heavy. Each note carried emotion, and it seemed to touch everyone in the room in a way words never could. As the music flowed, she forgot the fear. She forgot the crowd. She even forgot the judges. All that mattered was the sound, pure, deep, and real. Her body moved with the rhythm. Her fingers danced across the keys as if guided by something greater than skill. The final part of the piece rose like a wave, bold yet tender, powerful yet fragile. She hit the last note with trembling hands, letting it linger in the air. Then silence fell. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The room was completely still. Then a single clap echoed. Another followed. And then, as if the spell had broken, the entire hall erupted into thunderous applause. People stood up, cheering, clapping, shouting her name. Some had tears in their eyes. The sound filled every corner of the hall. Lena sat frozen, her hands still on the piano keys. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The sound of hundreds of people clapping for her. The sound she had dreamed of for years. She stood and bowed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The applause went on and on. It was no longer just about the performance, and it was about her journey, her courage, her heart. When she stepped backstage, the janitor was waiting. His eyes were wet, though he tried to hide it. "You did it," he said softly. Lena shook her head in disbelief. "I can't believe they liked it." "They didn't just like it," he said with a proud smile. "They felt it. That's what makes it special." Before she could say more, one of the judges entered the backstage area. He was the same man who had spoken kindly to her during the auditions. "Young lady," he said, "that was extraordinary. Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated. "I didn't really learn anywhere," she said shyly. "I just listened." The judge looked at her, surprised. "You mean you taught yourself?" She nodded. He smiled, shaking his head in disbelief. "That explains it," he said. "Your music is different. It's not rehearsed. It's honest." The other judges joined him, each offering kind words and congratulations. One of them handed her an envelope and said, "You've been chosen to perform at the National Youth Showcase next month. It's an event for rising musicians. You've earned it." Lena's mouth fell open. She couldn't find any words. She just stared at the envelope, her hands trembling. When the judges left, she turned to the janitor, who was still smiling quietly in the corner. "Did you hear that?" she said, her voice breaking. "They want me to perform at the national stage," he chuckled. "I told you your music would travel far." That night, when she got home, her parents were waiting up. Her mother hugged her so tightly that Lena could barely breathe. Her father, his eyes filled with emotion, said, "You've made this family proud." They sat around the small dining table, laughing, crying, and talking about the performance. For the first time, Lena saw hope in her parents' eyes, a kind of light that had been missing for a long time. Later, when everyone went to sleep, Lena stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. She could still hear the echo of the applause in her mind. The lights from the festival were fading, but her heart was still glowing. She thought about all the times she had doubted herself, all the nights she had spent alone at the piano. Every moment, every struggle had led her here. But she also knew this was just the beginning. The national showcase would be bigger, harder, more intimidating. Yet she didn't feel afraid anymore. The next morning, she returned to the hall. The janitor was there, as always, sweeping near the piano. He looked up when she walked in and said, "Couldn't stay away, huh?" She smiled. Not for long. He watched as she sat at the piano and began to play softly. "So," he said after a moment, "you'll be leaving for the big stage soon?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Next month." "Then you'd better keep practicing," he said. "Big crowds don't change good music, they just make it louder." She laughed and nodded. "I'll remember that." As she played, sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a warm glow. The same old hall that had once been her secret hiding place now felt like a second home. Over the next few weeks, Lena practiced harder than ever. The janitor helped her however he could, bringing her tea, fixing the old bench, keeping the lights on late so she could stay longer. They became an unlikely team, both connected by the love of music. When the day came for her to leave for the national event, the entire town gathered to wish her luck. Children held small banners with her name written on them. Neighbors brought flowers, and even her school principal came to shake her hand. The janitor stood a little apart from the crowd, his broom resting by his side. When she walked up to him, she said softly, "I don't know how to thank you." He smiled. "Just promise me one thing," he said. "No matter how far you go, never stop playing from the heart." She nodded. "I promise." As the train pulled away that afternoon, Lena looked out the window and saw the town fading in the distance, the place where her dream had begun. She clutched the charm bracelet on her wrist and smiled. She didn't know what awaited her in the big city or how people there would react to her simple, heartfelt music. But she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to face whatever came next. Her journey from the quiet corners of a small town hall to the bright lights of a national stage was only beginning. And deep down, she could still hear the echo of that night, the sound of thunderous applause, the sound that reminded her she had finally been heard. The train rattled through the countryside as Lena stared out of the window, her heart a mix of excitement and fear. This was her first time leaving her little town. The fields she had grown up seeing now passed by in a blur of green and gold. The closer she got to the city, the more nervous she became. She had been chosen to perform at the National Youth Showcase, something she had never dreamed would happen. In her small bag, she carried only a few clothes, her charm bracelet, and a piece of folded paper, the invitation to the event. She held it carefully as if it were made of glass. Around her, the other passengers chatted, read newspapers, and stared at their phones. But Lena's thoughts were elsewhere. She kept thinking about the hall back home, the janitor who had always encouraged her, and her parents who had cried with pride when she left that morning. When the train finally reached the city, Lena stepped out into a world that felt completely different. The air smelled of smoke and fresh bread from street vendors. The streets were loud and crowded, full of people rushing in every direction. Cars honked, lights flashed, and tall buildings seemed to touch the clouds. She had never seen so many people or such tall structures in her life. A young woman from the event committee met her at the station. She held a sign with Lena's name on it and smiled warmly. "You must be Lena," she said. "Welcome to the city." "We've been waiting for you." Lena nodded shyly, clutching her bag tighter. The woman led her to a car and they drove through wide streets filled with music shops, billboards, and theaters. Lena stared out of the window, her eyes wide with wonder. They arrived at a large music academy, where the event participants would be staying. The building was elegant with marble floors and tall glass doors. Inside, the air was filled with the faint sound of instruments being practiced, violins, flutes, and pianos echoing through the corridors. Lena was shown to a small but comfortable room. She placed her bag on the bed and sat down, feeling a strange mix of awe and loneliness. For the first time, she was truly on her own. The next morning, rehearsals began. The grand auditorium where she would perform was larger than anything she had ever imagined. Rows upon rows of seats stretched to the back, and the stage was so big that it made her feel tiny. She walked around slowly, trying to absorb every detail. Other young musicians were already there, practicing or chatting. Some were dressed in expensive clothes, their confidence showing in every movement. They talked about their teachers, their music schools, and the international competitions they had attended. Lena stood quietly in the corner, clutching her small notebook of melodies. She didn't know anyone. When she finally sat at one of the pianos to practice, a few other performers glanced her way. One boy whispered to another, "She's the one from that small-town festival." The other shrugged. "Let's see if she's really that good." Lena heard them, but she pretended not to. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play softly. Her melody was simple, just like before, but full of emotion. The noise in the room slowly faded as people turned to listen. When she finished, a few of them clapped politely, though others just went back to their own instruments. A tall instructor approached her after the session. "That was beautiful," he said. "Where did you study?" She hesitated for a moment, unsure what to say. "I didn't," she finally replied. "I learned by listening." The man raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised. "No teacher?" She shook her head. He smiled faintly. "Then you have a rare gift. But remember, at this level, emotion isn't enough. You'll need control, technique, and confidence. Don't let the size of the stage frighten you." Lena nodded, though her heart tightened. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what the instructor had said. Emotion isn't enough. The words echoed in her mind. She had never thought about music in terms of rules or techniques. For her, it had always been something she felt, not something she studied. The next few days were filled with rehearsals and preparation. Lena practiced tirelessly. Her fingers ached, her back hurt, but she refused to stop. Sometimes she felt out of place among the others. They spoke a language of music she didn't fully understand. Notes, terms, and techniques she had never learned. But she reminded herself why she was there, because of her heart, not her training. On the day before the final performance, the participants were invited to do a short preview for the judges. It wasn't mandatory, but many wanted to show what they had prepared. Lena decided to watch quietly from the back. One after another, the young musicians performed flawlessly. Their pieces were complex, their fingers moving at lightning speed. The audience of teachers and organizers clapped after each one, murmuring words like remarkable and technically brilliant. When Lena's name was called, a few people turned curiously. She walked slowly to the piano, her heart pounding. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play the melody she had chosen. The one she had played at the town festival, the song that had come straight from her heart. The hall grew quiet again. Her playing was soft, emotional, and filled with feeling, but it wasn't as fast or technically sharp as the others. When she finished, there was a short silence followed by polite applause. She could feel the difference. The energy wasn't the same. The other performers had received louder praise. She smiled faintly and stood up, bowing before leaving the stage. As she walked backstage, she overheard two people talking. One of them said, "She plays beautifully, but she lacks the training. The national showcase requires more precision." Those words hit her like a weight. She went back to her room, closed the door, and sat on the floor. Her chest ached and tears filled her eyes. For the first time, she wondered if maybe she didn't belong there after all. Later that evening, she received a message from her parents. It was short but warm. "We believe in you. Just play the way you always have." She smiled through her tears. Then she saw another message, this one from the janitor back home. He had somehow found a way to send her a short note through one of the organizers. It said simply, "Don't let the world change your song." Those words hit her deeper than anything else. She wiped her eyes and whispered to herself, "I won't." The next day arrived faster than she expected. The auditorium was filled with people, hundreds of them. The judges sat in front and reporters held cameras. The air was thick with anticipation. Backstage, the performers prepared nervously. Some paced, others stretched their fingers or whispered last-minute prayers. Lena sat quietly, staring at her hands. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding and the crowd seemed endless. She could barely breathe. But then she remembered the hall back home. The smell of old wood, the sound of her first note, the janitor's kind smile. She took a deep breath and began to play. At first, the notes were soft, hesitant. But soon they grew stronger. Her music flowed like water, natural and free. Every key she pressed told a story. Of a little girl listening by the window, of long nights of practice, of hope and doubt and courage. The melody filled the auditorium, washing over the crowd like a gentle wave. The judges leaned forward. The audience was completely silent. Even those who had doubted her before couldn't look away. As the piece built toward its final part, something inside Lena shifted. She stopped worrying about being perfect. She stopped trying to fit in. She just let go and played the way she had always played, with her heart wide open. When the last note faded, the room stayed silent for a long moment. The sound of it lingered in the air like a soft memory. Then slowly people began to clap. It started with a few, then more, until the entire hall stood on their feet, clapping loudly, cheering for her. Lena sat frozen, tears welling up in her eyes. She bowed deeply, overwhelmed by the noise. It wasn't just applause, it was acceptance. As she walked off the stage, one of the judges stopped her. "Young lady," he said, "your performance reminded us what music truly is. It's not about perfection, it's about honesty." She nodded, unable to speak. When she returned to her seat, her heart was still racing. She didn't know if she would win any prize, but it didn't matter. The sound of the audience's applause meant more than anything else. She had come to the big city with nothing but a dream, and she had made them listen. Later that night, back in her room, she looked out the window at the city lights. The streets below were quiet now, and the stars were faint above the tall buildings. She took off her charm bracelet and held it in her hand. She thought of her parents, the janitor, the old piano, and the little hall where it had all begun. She smiled softly. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She had learned something important, that music wasn't about fame or technique. It was about connection, about reaching people's hearts. And that night, she had done exactly that. As she closed her eyes, exhausted but happy, she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like tiny stars, and somewhere in the distance a piano played, soft, honest, and full of life. The morning after her performance, Lena woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing endlessly. The light from the window spilled across her face as she reached for it, half asleep and still heavy from the emotional night before. At first, she thought it might be her parents checking in after the big event, but when she unlocked her screen, she froze. There were dozens of messages, some from unknown numbers, some from friends back home, and many from people she had never met. Videos, comments, and news headlines filled her feed. Someone from the audience had recorded her performance and posted it online. Overnight, it had spread like wildfire. "The self-taught girl who made an auditorium cry," one headline said. Another called her the soul pianist. There were thousands of likes and shares, and people from all over the world were commenting about her story. Lena sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling. It didn't feel real. Just a few days ago, she had been a small-town girl who sneaked into the old hall to touch the piano keys when no one was around. Now people across the country knew her name. She opened a message from her parents. They had seen the video too. Her mother had written, "We watched you 100 times. Everyone in the neighborhood is talking about you. We're so proud." Her father, who rarely showed emotion, had written, "You filled the hall with music and our hearts with pride." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she smiled. She quickly typed a reply, "I did it for you, for home, for all of us." As the day went on, the event organizers called her to the main hall for an announcement. All the performers gathered, waiting. Nervously, the judges walked in, their faces calm but serious. The head judge stepped forward with a microphone. He began speaking about the importance of emotion in art, how sometimes a moment of truth can touch more hearts than years of training. Then he paused, looked around the room, and said, "This year our special recognition award goes to Lena." The hall erupted in applause. Lena's breath caught in her chest. She stood up slowly, still in disbelief, and walked to the stage as the crowd clapped for her. The head judge handed her a small golden plaque and said softly, "You reminded us why music exists." Lena bowed, her heart pounding. She couldn't stop smiling. She didn't win the top technical award, but what she received meant far more. It wasn't just for skill, it was for heart. After the ceremony, people began approaching her. Music teachers, journalists, and even a few other contestants who had once looked down on her. They all wanted to to congratulate her, to ask how she had learned to play like that without a teacher. She tried her best to answer, always saying the same thing. I just listened and felt. Later that evening, as she sat in a small cafe near the academy, a man in his 40s approached her. He introduced himself as a representative from a well-known music institute. I watched your performance last night, he said warmly. Your story is inspiring. Our academy would be honored to offer you a full scholarship. Lena's eyes widened. A scholarship? She repeated, hardly believing what she was hearing. Yes, he nodded. You have a natural gift. We want to help you refine it, to give you the technical foundation that matches your emotional depth. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her mind flashed back to all the times she had wished for lessons but couldn't afford them. All the nights she practiced alone, trying to make sense of the keys by instinct. And now someone was offering her what she had once thought impossible. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, the man smiled. You've earned it. That night she called her parents. Her mother cried, her father laughed with joy, and even the old janitor from her hometown sent a message through one of their neighbors. I told you, your song would travel farther than you ever could. A week later, Lena returned home for a short break before starting her new journey. The moment she stepped off the bus, the people from her town were waiting. They clapped, cheered, and some even brought flowers. She felt overwhelmed by their love. It wasn't just about fame, it was about belonging. About the connection she had unknowingly created with everyone who had ever doubted their own dreams. The old hall where she had once practiced in secret had been cleaned and decorated. A banner hung above the piano that read, "Welcome home, our star." The janitor stood near the stage, smiling proudly, his eyes glistening. You did it, he said softly when she approached. You made them all listen. Lena hugged him tightly. I couldn't have done it without you, she whispered. He chuckled. I just kept the lights on. You were the one who made the music. They both laughed. And then she sat at the same old piano, her fingers gently touching the worn keys. The crowd gathered around her, waiting. When she started playing, everyone fell silent. The tune was slow and warm, filled with gratitude and love. It was the same melody she had played at her first small audition, but now it sounded deeper, richer, like it carried every step of her journey within it. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The applause wasn't thunderous this time. It was gentle, heartfelt, and full of respect. After that, life changed quickly for Lena. News outlets reached out to her for interviews. Music magazines wrote articles about the girl who learned by heart. People invited her to perform at events and charity concerts. Yet despite all the attention, she stayed humble. She still helped her parents with small chores when she was home. She still spent evenings walking by the lake, listening to the wind, imagining melodies in her head. When she finally began studying at the music academy, it was like stepping into another world. The building was full of history, paintings of great composers on the walls, students practicing in every corner, and the soft hum of creativity floating in the air. At first, Lena struggled. The lessons were difficult, the pace fast, and she often felt behind. The teachers used terms she didn't understand, and her classmates seemed far more confident. But she never gave up. Every night she stayed late in the practice room, repeating scales and pieces until her fingers burned. When others went home, she stayed, driven by something stronger than ambition, gratitude. She never forgot how far she had come and who had helped her get there. Over time, her skills grew. The professors noticed her dedication. Her classmates began to admire her too, not just for her talent, but for her humility. One of them once told her, "You make it look like music is alive when you play." Months passed, and soon she was invited to perform at the Academy's annual concert, a grand event attended by famous musicians and critics. It would be her first performance since the national showcase, and though she was nervous, she was ready. When the night came, she stood backstage listening to the murmurs of the audience. The lights were bright, the air thick with expectation. She took a deep breath and thought about her journey. The nights in the empty hall, the first applause the moment her story went viral, the janitor's words echoing in her mind. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage with quiet confidence. The grand piano gleamed under the lights. She sat down, closed her eyes, and began to play. This time, her music was more than a performance, it was a story. Every note carried a memory, The sound of the old piano back home, the encouragement of her parents, the kindness of strangers, and the joy of rediscovering herself. The melody rose and fell like waves, capturing the beauty of her journey. By the time she finished, the audience stood again. The applause was thunderous, but Lena didn't cry this time. She simply smiled, bowed, and looked up at the ceiling, as if silently thanking everyone who had believed in her. After the concert, a famous conductor approached her and said, "You have something rare, something no amount of training can create. Don't ever lose it." Lena nodded, her heart full. That night, back in her dorm room, she sat by the window, staring at the city lights. She took out her charm bracelet again, the one she had carried through every step of her journey. She held it close, whispering softly, "I'll keep playing the way I always have, from the heart." And as she looked at the piano in the corner, she smiled, because she finally understood that her music had never been about being perfect. It was about being real. And that was something no one could ever take from her. Outside, the night was quiet, but inside her the melody continued. A tune that had begun in a small town, played on old keys and now echoed across the world. It was the same song that had once filled a hall with thunderous applause, and it was still growing, still alive, just like her dream. The morning sunlight poured into the quiet practice room, touching the polished piano keys like a soft blessing. Lena sat alone, her hands resting gently on the instrument that had changed her entire life. The years had passed quickly since her first big performance. She had played on many stages now, small and large, simple and grand, but somehow every time she sat at a piano it still felt like the first time. Her heart still beat fast and her hands still trembled a little before the first note. The music academy had become her second home. The teachers who once saw her as the untrained small-town girl now spoke about her with pride. She had grown not just in skill but in spirit. Her playing had a calm strength that came from every hardship she had faced. Even when she made mistakes, her sound carried warmth, honesty, and something rare, emotion. One morning after her practice session, her mentor entered the room. He smiled and said, "You've been invited to perform at the International Music Gala in Paris." Lena looked up in shock. "Me?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said. "They want young musicians who bring something unique to the stage. They saw your video, the one from the showcase. It's still circulating online. They want you to represent the Academy." Lena felt her chest tighten. The International Gala was one of the biggest events in the music world. Musicians from all over the globe performed there. She had dreamed of watching it someday, but never imagined she would actually stand on that stage. The mentor placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've earned it," he said kindly. "They'll ask you to play a piece of your choice. Choose something that speaks to who you are." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about what she could play. She thought of classical pieces she had studied, complicated works that would impress the judges, but something inside her whispered that she should play her own melody. The one she had written when no one knew her name, when music was her secret language. Days turned into weeks as she prepared. Her schedule was full, classes, rehearsals, meetings. Sometimes exhaustion made her fingers heavy, but she never stopped. She practiced her melody every night after everyone else had gone home. The sound echoed softly in the empty room, carrying her thoughts, her fears, her memories. Finally, the day of her departure arrived. She packed her simple black dress, her bracelet, and a small notebook full of scribbled tunes. As she sat on the airplane, looking down at the clouds, her heart was a mix of excitement and fear. She whispered to herself, "No matter how big the stage, I'll play like it's still the old hall back home." Paris was more beautiful than she had imagined. The streets were full of music, people playing violins on corners, singers performing near cafes, the sound of laughter and life all around. She walked along the Seine River one evening, watching the reflection of the city lights on the water, and thought about how far she had come. The next day, she visited the concert hall where the gala would be held. It was enormous, larger than anything she had seen before. The golden lights, the red curtains, the carved ceiling, everything felt majestic. As she walked across the empty stage during the sound check, she could almost hear the echoes of the great musicians who had played there before her. When the night of the performance finally arrived, Lena felt her hands tremble again. Backstage, she listened to the sound of the audience finding their seats, the soft murmur of excitement filling the air. She could hear other musicians performing before her. Flawless, technical, brilliant. Their notes filled the hall like lightning. She knew she could never match their speed or complexity, but she also knew she had something else, something only she could bring. When her name was announced, she took a deep breath and walked out into the bright lights. The audience was huge, hundreds of faces watching her. The grand piano waited at the center of the stage, shining under the spotlight. She sat down, closed her eyes for a moment, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note was soft, almost like a whisper. The melody was simple at first, gentle, familiar. The same tune she had played in that small town hall years ago. But as she continued, it grew. Her hands moved with confidence, her heart leading every sound. The music rose and fell like waves, telling the story of her life, her dreams, her struggles, the people who believed in her. Every note carried a memory. The old janitor's kind words, her parents' laughter, the applause that first filled her world with hope. It was more than music, and it was her journey, written in sound. The hall was silent. Not a single cough, not a single whisper. Even the judges leaned forward, their eyes fixed on her. When she reached the final part, her hands slowed, the notes fading gently into the air like a goodbye. And then silence. For a few long seconds, no one moved. Then all at once, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was deafening, echoing through the hall like thunder. Lena sat still, tears in her eyes, her hands trembling. She couldn't believe it. People were cheering, shouting her name, clapping endlessly. As she stood and bowed, she felt the same warmth she had felt that first night. Not pride, but gratitude. She wasn't just being applauded for her performance. She was being understood. Backstage, people congratulated her, but she barely heard them. All she could think about was calling home. When she finally did, her parents answered right away. Her mother's voice was filled with joy. "We saw the live stream," she said. "We saw everything." Her father added proudly, "The whole neighborhood watched at the community center. They played it on the big screen. Everyone stood up for you." Lena laughed through her tears. "Tell them thank you," she whispered. A few minutes later, her mentor approached her. "You did something rare tonight," he said softly. "You didn't just play music, you made people feel alive." That night, as she sat by her hotel window, looking out over the glowing city, she thought about everything. The girl who used to hide in the hall after hours, the janitor who encouraged her, the day she was told to play a simple tune, and the moment she filled the hall with thunderous applause. Every memory felt like a note in her life's song. In the days that followed, Lena's name spread even further. Music schools, event organizers, and even television shows reached out to her, but she didn't rush into anything. She wanted to stay true to what had brought her this far: honesty. She returned home a few weeks later, carrying her award and a heart full of gratitude. When she reached her town, people were waiting again, cheering, waving banners, clapping. But this time, Lena didn't feel like the same girl who had left. She had grown, learned, and lived through moments she once thought were impossible. She visited the old hall once more. It looked the same. The wooden floor, the faint smell of dust and polish, the piano in the corner. She sat down and touched the keys. They felt familiar, like old friends. The janitor, older now but still smiling, appeared at the doorway. "You're still the same," he said softly. "Famous now, but your eyes still have that spark." She smiled back. "This place gave me everything," she said. He nodded. "Then promise me something," he said gently. "No matter how far you go, never stop playing for yourself." "I promise," she replied. She began to play again. Softly, beautifully, the sound filling the empty hall. Outside, the sun began to set, its light pouring through the windows, bathing the room in gold. The janitor stood quietly, listening with a smile on his face. The music carried through the open door, drifting into the streets where children played and people walked home from work. Some paused to listen, recognizing the tune that had become part of their town's story. Lena's fingers moved effortlessly across the keys. The melody wasn't sad or grand, it was peaceful. It spoke of gratitude, of journeys, of home, and in that moment it felt like the world outside had stopped to listen again, just like before. Years later, when people talked about her, they didn't just remember her awards or her fame. They remembered the way she made them feel, how her music seemed to speak to their own lives. Some said she reminded them that dreams can start in the smallest places. Others said her story gave them courage to try. But for Lena, it was never about being remembered. It was about sharing the feeling she had always known, that music could heal, comfort, and connect people no matter where they came from. And so she kept playing, in big cities and small towns, for grand audiences and quiet rooms. Wherever she went, her song carried the same message: follow your heart, even when no one is listening. One night, many years later, as she sat at her piano surrounded by students who looked at her with admiration, she told them, "When I was young, someone told me to play a simple tune. That tune changed my life. So when you play, don't think about impressing others. Think about what your heart wants to say." The students nodded, their eyes bright. Then Lena turned back to the piano and began to play once more. The notes floated into the air, pure and full of emotion. Outside, the rain began to fall softly, tapping against the windows like applause from the sky. And somewhere deep inside that sound, in every drop, in every note, lived the same magic that had started everything: one girl, one piano, and one song that filled the world with thunderous applause.